Hello, this is Richard Barker, and I'm delighted to be joined in this really exciting topic of healthy longevity with someone who probably needs no introduction to the people who are watching this. Tina Woods has been involved in this field for quite a long time, and so you will probably recognize her. But I will ask Tina, if you wouldn't mind just making a brief personal introduction, how you got into this field, what you'd like to achieve, and then we can talk about some very specific things. Anyway, welcome, Tina.
I mean, I have been, I guess, involved in this space, longevity, quote unquote, I guess, for the past 7 years or so. So I guess that makes me technically one of the early day sort of adopters of even entering this whole industry. But really my interest in this space really comes through my passion for system change. And actually, I see all the things that are happening on the cutting edge of science and technology in longevity very much around this notion of moving upstream in terms of our health and being able to prevent chronic diseases before pathology set in and all the rest of it, which so it is about sort of moving what I always see at the moment, and we're seeing the evidence, our sort of broken sort of healthcare model in the West, particularly in the westernized world, which has been really sort of, I guess, highlighted as post pandemic, and how do we move and re-gear the whole system towards a much more preventative health paradigm, which it is not easy. So that's been what I've been trying to work out for the last sort of 6-7 years, and all the different hats that I've been wearing. So I'll stop there for the moment, because I'm sure all of this will come through in the conversation.
But you made reference, I think, to something we all care about, which is moving from treatment to prevention, and the focus on healthy longevity, not just the dealing with disease. What do you think the major challenges are that the field has to confront in order to do this?
So I think the challenges are quite significant. I mean, we are all very used to the healthcare systems that we are currently sort of using and have grown up with, basically. And I think, breaking that sort of, I guess, relationship with it is actually one of the most difficult ones, because we certainly see it in the UK. I mean, the NHS is our sort of prize institution, and most politicians don't dare sort of like challenge this idea that this is the magic jewel in the crown. I mean, I think it's interesting that our current government are prepared to challenge it, just because the burning platform has arrived in so many places that we really do need to change how we access healthcare, and what do we do to reduce demand on our healthcare system. The aging demographic is one part of it, but actually it's our chronically ill populations, which is the other part, which is the big conundrum that I think is facing a lot of the westernized world, and certainly the UK, and dare I say it, in the US, are significant challenges. We've got declining life expectancy in the US. We're on the same path in the UK. With a sick man of Europe, I mean, workforce inactivity is dragging the economy down in the UK. So it really is a serious issue. And I think part of it is the incentive structures that keep a grip on the status quo. We've got a lot of vested interests all over the place. We've got people who are not able, to keep pace with the sheer rapidity of science and technological advancements. That goes at all levels. I mean, the general public, our politicians, the regulators. We've got an academic and scientific research community that is geared competitively. It's siloed, so we don't actually encourage and nurture collaboration, which is really where we're going to get the significant leaps and bounds, certainly in terms of our understanding of health, because we are not structured that way, And I think, the other things, it comes down to, the incentive structures. At the moment, we've got a lot of industries that make a lot of money off us being ill. That is really, really a difficult one to crack. We always are, and don't get me wrong, I have worked in pharma and biotech for many, many years. In fact, that's the vast majority of my professional life has been working in that sector. We will always need fantastic treatments and diagnostics and so forth. But actually, a lot of profit from the pharma industry comes from chronic diseases. So that's something to reckon with. And we also have, for example, obesity epidemic. That is, and there's in all the costs associated with what the hit is on economies as a result of that, are quite staggering. But that is led by us living in very obesogenic environments. We eat way too much junk food, way too much ultra high processed food. We do not move enough. We are addicted to our cars. And of course, we've got air pollution. I mean, these are all factors that are huge drags on our health. So there's only a certain amount that you can do as an individual to really take charge of your health. If you're motivated, if you've got the resources, if you've got the knowledge and the tools and the technologies, that's great. You can do a lot in terms of your lifestyle. You can be highly motivated, you know, and I count myself in that camp. You know, that's great because you have more chance of having a good, long, healthy, happy life. And, you know, a healthy life expectancy or a health span is often how we describe it. But if you're on the other end, if you're, you know, if you're disadvantaged, you have low educational status, if you're living in a very deprived area, you don't have life chances, you've got low quality work, you know, you're living in an area where there's no investment in jobs, there's no hope. I think hope is actually a really important factor in the human condition. If you don't have those elements and you're breathing in really horrible air, you've got air pollution, no green spaces, you're afraid of sending your kid to the playground because of gangs, you know, you're not going to have as many chances to live a good, healthy, long life. So these are the big questions that are vexing politicians, you know, wider society, and especially post-pandemic. I think there's an increased awareness that, you know, something's going to have to change. And so where are those big, bold solutions going to come from? So I think it comes down to the incentive structures at the moment that we are operating to in society. And I'm speaking more from the westernized world at the moment. I was heartened, actually, quite recently. I was invited by the New York Federal Bank Reserve in New York, the New York Federal Reserve Bank. I've been invited to two different sessions. One was in New York just last month during UN General Assembly Week, to really look at this question of how can the financial world actually invest in the wider determinants of health, the social determinants of health, because I think everyone is reckoning and realizing that we need to raise the opportunities for everyone, because otherwise, and what we're finding is that actually everyone suffers when we have these widening systemic inequalities that are basically getting worse in our society, and we're really starting to see the effects of that now. So I think
that's really quite encouraging, that dialogue that you just referred to there. But I mean, just going back over what you've said, I agree with you about the vested interests that's out there in terms of industries, in terms of the medical profession, and the need to engage with people politically. And to recognize, as you say, the inequalities. It may be rather easier for people like you and me to take the actions that we need to take. So let's move to an announcement that I've just seen that you have made, because you're not only very good at spelling out some of those challenges, but you want to tackle some of them. Tell us a little bit about the institute that you and others are about to launch, or shall we say relaunch?
Relaunch, yeah. So this is the International Institute of Longevity, which actually has been around for a while, and that was co-founded by Joanna Bench and Prince Michael of Liechtenstein, and right from day one, Eric Verdun has been very involved as a co-founder of the institute. So
mention who Eric is while you're.
So Eric Verdun, so he's the I think his official title is president of the Buck Institute. So he's the CEO of the Buck Institute.
Just in case people don't know.
Yeah,
that's all.
Of course. I mean, again, he is someone who, if you're involved in longevity, will no doubt have heard of, because he's a big cheese, so to speak. And
Joanna is a very well established runner of her own longevity clinic, which I visited. Yeah, so
and we have both visited, and actually I first met Joanna in the early days of the All-Party Parliamentary Group for Longevity, which of course, Richard, is how we sort of began our sort of work together on that group. So I've known Joanna for a long time. She was actually, in fact, she's one of the true pioneers and initiators of this concept of a longevity clinic. She was one of the first to actually set one up in Warsaw. It's now in Zurich. And of course, the International Institute was something that was developed alongside that. And of course, Eric has been very involved since day one in that. So I think, you know, there's been top level expertise and brains really around this whole evolution that Joanna has created with her clinic and now the Institute.
So what are your highest goals? Sorry to interrupt you, but what are your highest goals for this relaunched Institute?
So I think, and the reason why I got excited, there are various reasons. I think I think what I've seen over the years is quite a change in how longevity is seen. And I have an interest in bringing all the science and longevity into the mainstream, so that it's not just seen as fringe, not just seen for the billionaires, which is kind of like, you know, 7 years ago, it was kind of seen like that, you know, radical life extension. Yeah, you know, if you're a billionaire, well, why wouldn't you want to live forever? You've got it good, you know, so it kind of made sense. But I think over the years, it sort of has evolved. And of course, the pandemic has had quite a significant impact on that. So the whole longevity industry has really started to be much more focused on what I call the health span bit, years lived in good health, and maximizing those, reducing the period of multimorbidity, and then you die. Yes, a lot of people still want to live forever, and there's this whole immortality question, but actually really the holy grail is actually converging health span with lifespan. If you really get it right, you will reduce, as you see with the supercentenarians, if they live really great lives, healthy lives until literally the day before they die, or not day, but they suddenly just die. And so
but let's be controversial here, because I like to be controversial and draw our audience in also to comment afterwards. Do you think that the desire of some individuals to live forever and all of the dialogue about that is helpful to the field or unhelpful?
I think it depends. I think we will always need, those what I call the real pioneers, really sort of, asking these questions, because I think that's what, scientific progress and asking these very, very challenging questions, are really, really important. And, listen, I mean, the people who are their own guinea pigs in this, and I'm talking about Brian Johnson and of course, people like Aubrey de Grey, who've been very, very involved in this sort of idea of escape velocity, etc. I think, it's really important that we listen and we engage with all these voices, because, that's also their passion and their joy, and actually what they see as their purpose in life, which, let's not underestimate that. That's actually a really important part of living and wanting to live. I'm really
and they've certainly brought a lot of attention to the field.
Back to the Institute. So I think where we're at, and I think there's been a lot of, I guess, initial work, from the so-called longevity community, and I'm talking about the uber scientists, and of course a lot of it really had its start in the Silicon Valley sort of hub and what have you, I think and of course the whole structure and the whole medical model, which is very biomedical, in the US, we know that. So I think in the so a lot of the discussion, the investment, and let's face it, the US is still the largest place where you can get money to do stuff and invest in businesses and so forth. It was very, very much in that mold of like, led by the quick fix idea. Listen, we want that pill, that therapeutic that's going to do the magic, give you extra years, maybe help you live forever. So that was very much the initial focus. And of course, since 2013, when Cell published, the Hallmarks of Aging paper, there's been a lot of focus around, what is it that we can do internally, sort of across the hallmarks of aging that will give us that kind of those magic pills, those quick fixes, to really give us a longer life, right? So that was kind of where it started. But I think what I've seen, and of course, as I've been engaging in this world and seeing, I think, a different side of it, and also recognizing the challenges of bringing this science and technology into the mainstream, what I've seen is actually more and more science and data and evidence to show how humans, and I'm not talking about animals, because of course most of the research in the sharp end of longevity science is done in animals, nematode worms, mice, etc., Drosophila flies. When you actually look at the research in humans, you have to ask the question, well, why isn't a lot of that wonderful stuff that we're seeing in the animal models, why isn't it translating into the human system? Because that's the big conundrum. And I think that the community has started to really start to ask those questions. It's sort of like, it's fine kind of going back and getting all this wonderful data from the animal studies and kind of reinforcing what we know already almost. But it's actually this undiscovered, this sort of pioneering space, like what really is happening in the human system. And as we're getting more science and more data, we're realizing actually it's really super complicated, very complicated. And actually what we're also realizing is that the wider sort of environmental factors, and when I say that, I mean psychological factors, behavioral factors, environmental factors, I mean even like air pollution, pollutants in the air, microplastics, our sort of state of aspiration and hope, and our need for optimism. These all have a bearing on our biology. And actually, when you look at some of the classic lifestyle factors, like the food that we eat and activity levels and all the kind of what I call the blue zone stuff, which of course has been getting a lot of public attention. In the end, it's almost like these elements that are outside, the box of sort of the lab, where everything's done in very sort of controlled sort of conditions. This is the space that we really need to engage with and understand, like what will actually drive human health span, and what I would like to see it moving into resilience, because of course there's a really interesting whole discussion around why is it that some humans are more resilient than others to all the life stresses that we are faced with. And of course, coming out of COVID, psychological distress, we see it in young people now, mental health, like a time bomb. These are actually affecting our biology. And how do we create, I guess, these environments for human flourishing is really the central question that I'm asking. So we need more human trials, and we need to get that work out of the animal models into the human trial situation.
And that's what the Institute will start to do?
That is one area that we're going to be looking at. That's
Yeah.
one area that we're going to be looking at, that sort of, you know, these decentralized trials, working with leading clinics around the world who have been out there treating people, managing people, because, you know, if you go to any clinic that's worth its salt, they see a person as an N=1. They look at that person as a holistic person. They're very, very unique in the way that they need to be understood and managed and helped, okay?
But haven't you just articulated one of the biggest sort of theoretical challenges, which is that every person is different, the way they age is different, what they respond to is different.
Yeah.
In an N=1 world, how do you collect information about what works and what doesn't?
You need, so this is the massive conundrum that the longevity scientific field is faced with. In the end, it comes down to data gathering on that N=1. So where do you get that data? You can get the data from your wearables, which is obvious. Implantables, which are just starting to become, been used. You can get it from all the different sensors around us that can monitor our behavior, our ability to move around in environments, So there's all sorts of technologies now, which is, I guess, the opportunity. There's all sorts of technologies now that are able to collect that data at an N=1 level. So we've got a couple of, and let me just finish this point. So I think, but once you've got that data on an N=1 level, we've now got the ability through all the sort of the technologies and infrastructure that is possible now. We've got, things that are happening in India, things that the UK government are looking at in terms of being able to connect data sets, being able to link those data sets together through means like, personal data wallets, through digital ID and verification, which of course is being used in India, for example, where they're giving health IDs to over 1 billion people, where they can link that up with all the other records, in public sector. This is the big stuff that the UK government are looking at the moment. So once you get to that point where you can really start to aggregate what sort of access at an N=1 level, those data sets, then be able to analyze those data sets at an aggregated level, and then to look at health trajectories across a person's life course, boy, that's quite powerful. So I was just at an event a couple of days ago, Our Future Health. They've just signed up they've just reached this milestone of over 1 million people in the UK.
I'm one of them for sure, yes.
This health study. So this is really interesting, because what we've got there is potentially a test bed where we've got people who are giving their blood samples. I would say let's make sure that they're actually measuring all the stuff that we can now measure in blood. That will give us even more information, but it's a start, and that's the conversation that I'm having. But we start to actually look at what are the amazing things that have happened out of UK Biobank, which is still used as a gold standard reference tool for a lot of the studies in longevity. Well, here's another study which is absolutely recruiting well beyond some other examples like All of Us in the US. They've been much more successful. They've got lots more people already. And they've really focused on diverse populations, which is the other thing.
Which is the big difference from the UK Biobank, which wasn't sufficiently diverse.
Wasn't diverse, exactly.
And you find them to be open to people like us coming to them and saying, hey, why don't you collect this additional information? And why don't you apply AI to be able to deduce from all of this N=1 some truths that might apply to large groups of people?
I have an open dialogue, and I have done with the former CEO, who is actually one of the authors of a Lancet paper we published a couple of years ago on the Quantum Healthy Longevity Innovation Mission with the National Innovation Center for Aging, around this idea of the exposome, which I'll come on to in a second.
Cool.
And then of course, Raghib Ali, who's now the new CEO, he's very, very open, very, very interested in the whole evolving field of aging research and these biomarkers, etc. So there is an openness, and I think this is what we really need to catalyze, is that openness to collaboration and scientific R&D, because that is where we're going to get the real opportunities. Now, I would argue that we still have a research community that is still who has an aspiration to be much more collaborative, because I was heartened. I attended a medical research council meeting in March, actually, on how do we get the research community to come together to really drive what they're calling the prevention society and economy, which of course is very much on the desk now of the current government, linking health to economic growth missions. So how do we do that as a research community? And so it was really kind of, I guess, recognized that at the moment we have the siloization of research, which is actually not really helping the exponential leaps forward that we could with AI and quantum, dare I say it, because of course quantum is the next level there, and systems biology, etc. How do we actually get that right? So I think the UK is a little bit behind. I think they've got some interesting shoots like the Advanced Research Invention Agency. They don't have very much money. They're trying to model themselves on DARPA. Unfortunately, no, not unfortunately, I think the reality is, because it's a great opportunity, but I think we see in the US a much more greater openness to really big, bold ideas, which again is what we really need in the scientific world, especially in this space of longevity science. So the X Prize, which many of you will know listening to this, are already underway with their Health Span X Prize, which is pretty focused on sort of the internal bit, like what do we need to understand, what's happening inside, to really prevent and actually delay the aging process, and 65 to 85 I think is their time window, and with very specific parameters. So that's great, and there's going to be a lot of stuff that comes out of it. But there's this whole other level, which is what I describe as the sort of the next frontier. And this is where the exposome, I think, is a new scientific framework which starts to capture what I've been describing as all the external factors that have a bearing on our biology, on our epigenetics, on our physiology, et cetera, et cetera.
So let's get on to that in just a second, right? I do want to talk about the exposome, but I think you're making a very interesting point about what role can the UK play in this new generation of more prevention-focused strategies. And the audience for this is a global audience, but a large number of people are in or care about the UK. The UK has got some initiatives that will collect data that aren't being collected so systematically elsewhere in the world. And
Yes.
we obviously have a strong research base. It's probably as siloed as the research base is everywhere else. I'm currently reading a book called Good Energy, which I'm enjoying. And it traces back many diseases to mitochondrial dysfunction.
Oh, interesting.
Hence the energy. And so we have a medical profession which is siloed into what disease did you present with, rather than saying what might be happening underlying all of those diseases, or many of them, in terms of metabolic dysfunction, which of course is again affected by not just our mindset and our lifestyle, but some of the exposomics that I'd invite you to talk about, because this is, I think, quite fresh for many people to think about this. We all know about the other omics, we know about genomics, proteomics, and metabolomics. For those who haven't been deeply into the field, what is exposomics, and what do you think the next frontier will be in that regard?
So I will describe that, and I'll try and relate that back to what the Institute are going to be trying to do in terms of standardization and protocols and stuff. So the exposome literally is an umbrella term that describes all the external exposures that a human person is faced with or exposed to throughout their lifetime. So even before birth, through in the womb, etc., and through their parents' behavior and lifestyle, actually, that actually it shows up epigenetically in the offspring. So it's even before birth, right through to death. So it's all these external exposures. So what are those external exposures? I kind of briefly had mentioned them before, but to summarize, there's psychological, there's environmental, which again is everything from the food that you eat, your activity levels, the air that you breathe. And then there's the whole kind of social factors. So the socioeconomic factors are really significant. And this is what we're finding, obviously, coming out of COVID, the systemic inequalities that, give people less life chances, less opportunities, et cetera, they are really impacting their health. So it describes, so it's this term that kind of recognizes that the human being is part of a wider system, which does affect us internally. So I think
how do we untangle all of that, right? Because as you say, any individual, it's their upbringing, it's where they live, it's where the air they breathe, it's their lifestyle, it's a whole bunch of things which are different for every individual. How do we disentangle what different exposomic factors are driving?
So if you and I did this myself actually the other day. If you actually do a ChatGPT search on what are the exposomic factors that drive human health, or really, it's going to be all the obvious stuff that we know about. And to be honest, it's actually blue zone stuff. It's like air pollution comes up tops. It's the food. It's your sleep. It's your activity levels. It's all these sorts of things. But I think the interesting area is, to your point, we all respond differently. Some of us are more resilient to different things. Now, some of that might be down to our genetics, of course, and that's what we're finding with the supercentenarians research. They clearly have certain attributes because of their genetics that allow them to live longer, and obviously there's a whole bunch of research around that. But actually, the Human Genome Project actually told us that actually, for the most of us, genetics is actually only a small proportion of the determinants of our health. It's much more around what I call the exposome factors, which then do influence our genetics, right, epigenetically, etc. So I think this is the big, and this is what so going back to the X Prize, I think I'm working with a number of colleagues on this idea of the Human Exposome Project.
So are you going to make a bid for one of the X Prizes?
So we're pitching that next week, and
okay, cool.
And it's a very neat overlay and complement to the Human Health Span X Prize, because I think what everyone is starting to realize.
Okay, sorry. Let me give you the chance. You would like a different X Prize on exposomics, and
exactly.
Have you got buy-in?
It's called Exposome Project. Yes.
Okay, and so you've got buy-in.
We do. Well, we're pitching it, and we seem to have a lot of interest. So wish us luck. We'll see where it goes, but we should know by the end of this month. So, or we'll have an inkling, as it were, because there are many great ideas being pitched, and of course you would imagine an X Prize gets lots of big brains, but there's some really interesting ideas. But I think what is interesting is I think people have realized that there's only so much that an individual can do for their health. And there's so much that is the responsibility of a more collective view of health, which is around, and this is where government need to intervene. This is where public health needs to get a much bigger airing. And I think going back to the New York Federal Reserve interest in this whole space, I think they've recognized, which I think is really interesting. So, as a key lever of change, because I'm interested in system change, what you need is, and this is where some of our work, Richard, started with the All-Party Parliamentary Group, because I didn't really know about politics and government, and of course they're a huge part of the system change that you need to reckon with, policy, regulation, all those sorts of things. But you also need the big money following the money, right? So,
and you need to be able to provide some sort of return on investment. So if government makes an investment in improving the quality of the air, or changing the transport system, or the education system, all of these things, they will respond best if you can say, here's the evidence of the difference it would make financially as well as clinically. Is that what the Exposomic Prize will focus on?
So there's a couple of things that's worth mentioning, and as you know, Richard, I wear a lot of hats, but they all interconnect around the system change piece that I mentioned in terms of driving towards prevention. So the Human Exposome Project, it's going to focus really on the technology. What are the technologies that we need? Whatever it might be, new sensors, implantables, whatever it might need.
Detect,
understand the individual response to these exposomic factors. Okay, so that's going to be a really interesting experiment, and you can just imagine. I mean, it is a colossal exercise. We're not going to tackle all the exposomic factors at once. We're actually going to be we're looking at a particular area at the moment, which will then be the proof of concept, right? That this is really important to start measuring, because not only for the individual. It's about collectively in terms of population health, national health, etc., and also for the world, because one of the areas that we're really looking at, which is really interesting, is this whole business of the air that we're breathing. Now, I've only just recently been, I guess, my eyes have been opened, because I'm not an expert on air, but I am absolutely shocked at at how the particulate matter, sulfur dioxide, nitrogen oxide, ozone, microplastics in the air, respiratory dust.
And lots of people don't understand that agriculture has a large role to play.
And
so
they
the
do.
Ammonia from agricultural runoff is actually one of the, and most people think agriculture kind of benign in that regard, but no, it's actually can be a major pollutant.
It's major pollutant, and even like cleaning products. I mean, I had no idea, the cleaning products that we're using in our homes, they are really dangerous. I mean, so the more I find out about this, and I'm looking at the evidence, So this is a really, really big area. And of course, it's the socially disadvantaged groups that are hardest hit by, air pollution, all the things that are in the air. And we're seeing that with deaths being recorded in the UK from mold and, with asthma, for example, from air pollution in the road. So it's really starting to register, and the government are really starting to look at that. And then in parallel with that, we're looking and recognizing that air indoors, for example, because we spend most of our time indoors in our homes, in offices, for example, and then you've got all the other sort of buildings. Actually, the quality of the air, you can actually clean the air internally, right? So of course, that's already big business for a lot of organizations looking at this, and the technology is really sophisticated. So I'm actually looking at, and this is wearing my Business for Health hat, there's a lot of work that we're doing looking at health economic modeling in terms of, like, if you had clean air in social housing, for example, because we have a whole big problem with mold in social housing, which is actually starting to kill people. If you actually start cleaning the air, what will that bring in terms of health benefit, but also wider socioeconomic benefits? Because it could even be that the reason why we're so unhealthy in the UK, which is actually a huge drag on our workforce activity rates, which is now pulling the economy down, there could be a much bigger proportion of that down to even the quality of air that we're breathing than we even recognize. So
we're used to filtering water.
Exactly.
Because we're concerned about what pollutants there might be and microbiological contamination. And you're suggesting that the future will be that we clean up our air inside as well.
It could be a really big area that will get a lot more attention in terms of public health and also with government intervention as well. So the other thing just to mention in relation to that, but it does connect up with Human Exposome Project, is, and this is wearing my Business for Health hat, because, Richard, I wear a number of hats, but we're actually working very, very closely with the Office for National Statistics on enhancing the health index, which is an index that has been used for about 5 years, that measures health as an asset, not as a cost, as an asset linked to the economy, which of course is now what the UK government are looking at, across 3 key areas, which is healthy people, which is sort of more the inside, healthy lives, which is more around the behavioral stuff, but then healthy places. So it goes across those 3 core parameters, and it's about how do we measure health and healthy life expectancy, and how do we link that with economic growth? So there's a whole piece of work there that we're in discussion with.
That's really interesting, because I think if we could persuade the government, they've become persuaded, the UK government, that green energy is a driver of economic growth.
Yeah.
If we could persuade them that some of these longevity-focused interventions are a source of economic growth.
Exactly.
And not just that people might work longer and more productively, but there might be companies created that do some of the things that you would like to see done.
So this is precisely it, Richard. We want to see companies cleaning up the air for us, getting attention and having the right sort of, standards and all the rest of it, with building regulations and health impact assessments, and housing applications, all those sorts of things. Get that sorted, because it could be that, that clean air bit is just like healthy food and eating less. And so this is another big of my hobby horses. We need to eat less junk food and less ultra high processed food. So we need to look at the food industry and look at the whole food system, right? This is the system change that we need to look at, and we need to pull together the right data, feed into this health index that can then influence government decision making, treasury decisions, to stop pouring. I know we need the NHS to be fixed, but we need to invest in other areas that are actually at the root cause and the solution of keeping us healthy and well, so we can reduce the demand on our NHS.
And the old party group, we talked about health in all policies, and that's true. I now have a mental picture, Tina Woods, of you with your many hats riding your many hobby horses. I think this would make a nice cartoon. It's your vision is a wide and sweeping one, but your energy is definitely equal to that vision. So I'd like to thank you for the time you spent with us today, and I wish you well, and indeed very happy to collaborate on many of these things. So Tina Woods, networker supreme and visionary, thank you very much.
Thank you, Richard.